Hello, and welcome to week 2 of CSM 61A, problem 2, FizzBuzz. So let's start off by looking at this problem description, which tells us that we want to implement FizzBuzz given an integer n that will print the numbers from 1 to n. But if a number is divisible by 3, then we'll print the word fizz. If it's divisible by 5, we'll print the word buzz. And if it's divisible by both 3 and 5, then we will print the word FizzBuzz. Okay, so to start this question, let's think about how we can deal with every number from 1 to n. Because what we want to do with this function is print every single number from 1 to n. So that could be 1, 2, 3, all the way until we have reached integer n. So in order to do this question, we can use iteration, right? Because by using iteration, we can start from a smaller number, such as 1, and work our way up to a larger number, such as n. So in order to use iteration, we have to start off by looking at number 1, and then work our way up until we've reached n. So in order to do this, we'll probably need to start with a variable that we set equal to 1. So we can set I equal to 1. And what this does is it gives us a starting point, so we can now use a certain loop to start from I equals 1 until we've reached our last number. So what we want to do after getting our starting point is actually use a while loop. So while I is less than or equal to n will be our condition. And the reason we choose this condition is because, again, we're printing every number from 1 to n inclusive, as they show us right here. So because we want to include 1 and every single number up until n, we will continue this loop while I is less than or equal to n. Okay, so now we have to deal with the cases in which we want to actually print our number. So we're given a couple of different cases here. Either a number is divisible by both 3 and 5, in which case we'll print FizzBuzz. And since this is probably the most complicated case, we can start with this and then work our way to the simpler cases later. So to check for this case, we can start by using an if statement. So if is how we will start this. And then how can we check that I is both divisible by 5 and divisible by 3? We can use the modulo operator. And so what the modulo operator will do is it will give us the remainder when I is divided by our second argument. So if I call I mod 3, then this will give us the remainder of when I is divided by 3. So in order to test if I is divisible by 3, we know that I mod 3 will give us 0, because there will be no remainder when I is divided by 3. So if I mod 3 is equal to 0, and we'll use our double equals, and I mod 5 is equal to 0, then this is the case in which we're dealing with a number that is both divisible by 3 and 5. So, like the problem tells us, for numbers divisible by both 3 and 5, we will print FizzBuzz. So in this case, we will print out FizzBuzz. And that takes care of that first case. Okay, so this if statement will only be true if our number is divisible by both 3 and 5, because we're using this and keyword right here. So if I is divisible by 3, but it's not divisible by 5, then the function won't enter this case. And likewise, if I is divisible by 5, but it's not divisible by 3, then this case will also not be entered. So what we can do is we can actually use an else if statement, shortened like this. And now we can check if I is just divisible by 3 or if I is just divisible by 5. So let's start off by checking if I is divisible by 5. So in order to do that, we use the same technique from earlier, which is just checking I mod 5 and setting that equal to 0. And in this case, we know I is only divisible by 5, not both, because had it been divisible by both, then we would have entered this first if case right here. But since we're looking at this else if case, we know that that initial check is not true. So if we enter the else if I mod 5 equals 0 case, we know I is only divisible by 5, in which case we would print buzz. Okay. And then we can use the same logic to check for any numbers that are divisible by 3. So if I mod 3 is equal to 0, then we will print fizz. So now what we've done is we've taken care of every case in which I is divisible by 3 and 5, or I is just divisible by 5, or I is just divisible by 3. And this leaves us with one final case, which is where I is divisible by neither 3 nor 5. So we can go back to the problem statement and look at the doc tests, which show that in the cases where I is divisible by neither, we just print out I, right? So we would print out 1 or 2 or 4 or 7 or 8. So that means if none of these if statements evaluate to true, we can just say else print I. So in the case that I did not, that none of these previous if statements were true, then I is not divisible by 3 and 5, I is not divisible by 5, and I is not divisible by 3, meaning we'll just print the integer like the problem description told us to. Okay, so we're almost done. So now that we've taken care of every case, we have to remember to continue our loop, right? Because we're starting off at integer 1 and continuing onward up until n. So the only thing missing here is to actually increment I. So in order to do that, after we've checked every case, we can just add 1 to I. So if we add 1 to I, that means when we enter this loop, I will first be 1. Then the next time we enter the loop, I will be 2, and then 3, and so on. And as you can see, that's how we'll get a result like in the doc test, where we start from 1 and just the number continues to get larger. That is all because of the iteration. So yeah, so that is all for week 2, question 2, FizzBuzz.